Rachel Grant sat across from William Robinson, nervously fidgeting with her hands as she waited. The cool leather of the chair felt uncomfortable, a reminder she didn't belong there. William was engrossed in a stack of papers, and the scratching of his pen echoed in the room, heightening her anxiety. After what felt like an eternity, he finally placed the pen down and leaned back in his chair, giving her that same cold, calculated look she had seen too many times. "Rachel," William said, his voice distant and controlled. "I assume this isn't about work." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She had gone over this conversation so many times in her head, but now, face to face with him, she struggled to find her voice. Swallowing hard, she forced the words out. "No, it's not," she said quietly, eyes fixed on her hands. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was suffocating. Williams remained perfectly still, showing no reaction. He didn't even blink. Time seemed to stretch unbearably, each second weighed down with tension. Finally, he spoke, his tone flat. "I see." That was it. No shock, no emotion, just cold acknowledgement. Rachel blinked, feeling her pulse race. "It's yours, William," she continued, trying to steady her voice. "I thought you should know." William sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk, fingers steepled in front of him. "Rachel," he said calmly, "this is unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" she echoed, her voice shaking with disbelief. She had expected some kind of reaction, anger, maybe even concern, but not this detached indifference. "Yes," William said, meeting her gaze with a cold, unreadable expression. "You should have been more careful." Her stomach turned. We were careful." "Obviously not careful enough," he shot back, his words sharp and unfeeling. Leaning back again, he narrowed his eyes slightly. "So now you're telling me because you—" "What? Expect me to do something about it?" Rachel's throat tightened. She hadn't planned for this reaction. She hadn't imagined it would be like this. "I thought you'd want to know," she said softly. "Maybe we could figure something out." William's expression hardened. "Figure something out?" "Rachel, you know how this works. I'm married. I have a family, a reputation. This," he gestured between them, "was never supposed to be more than what it was." His words hit her like a punch. The late nights, the whispered conversations, the moments she thought were real. They were nothing to him. She'd been naive, and now she realized it too late. "I'm keeping the baby, William," she said, her voice firmer now, sitting up straighter in her chair. William stood from his desk and walked around to face her, his face impassive. "I can't be involved in this, Rachel. You know that. This conversation never happened. Understand?" Her blood turned cold. "You're just going to walk away? Like this?" "I have to," he said simply. "You should too." Rachel stood up, anger bubbling in her chest. "I can't just walk away from this, William. This is your child too." William's jaw clenched. "Rachel, I'm warning you. Let this go. I've helped you enough. If you make this a problem, I'll make sure you regret it." Her heart sank. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William didn't respond immediately. He just returned to his desk, sitting back down with an icy expression. "It means today is your last day at Robinson Associates." Rachel froze in place. "What?" "You'll be quietly let go. I've already talked to HR," William said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "You'll get a severance package, of course, but after today, you're no longer employed here." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. "You're firing me because I'm pregnant. Because of you." "I'm protecting my family, Rachel. You should look out for yourself." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you come after me, I'll make sure you never work in this field again." Rachel's hands shook, caught between rage and disbelief. She just stared at the man she once trusted, the man who now saw her as a threat. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she managed to say, "I never thought you'd do this. You should have never thought otherwise," William replied, calmly, as if this were just another business deal. Her vision blurred, tears threatening to fall, but she blinked them away. She refused to cry in front of him. She wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Without another word, she turned and left his office. Her legs moved on autopilot as she returned to her desk, and her hands packed her belongings mechanically. Each item she placed in her bag felt heavier than the last. In the elevator down to the lobby, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the shiny walls, struggling to keep herself together. But inside, she was shattered, pregnant, out of a job, and blacklisted from the career she had poured everything into. The moment she stepped outside, the tears finally fell. In the busy crowd, she felt invisible. No one knew what she was going through. William Robinson had made sure of that. But as she walked away from the building that once held her dreams, she placed her hand on her belly. She wasn't completely alone. She had her child. Somehow, they would make it. Sunlight streamed through the blinds in Lucas's bedroom, casting long shadows across the floor. He stood in front of the mirror, fiddling with his tie for what felt like the 100th time. It was his first day at Robinson Associates, and his nerves buzzed like static under his skin. "Looking sharp," he muttered, trying to psych himself up as he straightened his posture. From the kitchen, the sound of a kettle boiling broke the silence. He could hear his mum moving around, getting ready for her day. A small smile crept onto his face. She was going to be so proud of him after hearing about his first day. He glanced at his phone. 5 minutes until he had to leave. Just enough time to get his mum's blessing. Lucas walked into the kitchen to find Rachel sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked up when he entered, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mum, how do I look?" Lucas asked, grinning as he spun around to show off his suit. "First day at Robinson Associates. It's huge, right?" Rachel nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Yeah, Lucas, it's big." Lucas paused. Something about her tone threw him off. The excitement he'd expected to see wasn't there. Instead, she seemed worried. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, sitting down across from her. "You don't seem as happy as I thought you'd be." Her eyes dropped to the tea, avoiding his gaze. "I am happy for you, Lucas. It's just, I'm not sure about that place." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "It's Robinson Associates, one of the top insurance firms in the country. This could be a game changer for me. For us." "I know, baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But that place, it's not what you think." He stared at her, confusion etched on his face. "What are you talking about? Do you know someone who worked there? Is that why you're worried?" Her grip on the mug tightened, knuckles turning white. Her lips pressed into a tight line, and for a moment it seemed like she was about to say something. But instead, she just shook her head, eyes still fixed on her tea. "It's nothing like that," she finally said. "Just be careful, okay?" Lucas leaned back in his chair, trying to make sense of her sudden shift. Lucas's mum had always been his biggest cheerleader, constantly pushing him to aim for the stars and telling him he could accomplish anything if he put in the effort. But now, right when he was on the verge of achieving something huge, she seemed to be holding back. "Careful," he repeated, his voice laced with growing frustration. "Mum, this is what we've been working towards for years. I didn't go through all that schooling and internships for nothing. This job could change everything for us." "I know," she replied, finally looking up at him, her eyes clouded with something that resembled fear. "But not everything is as it seems." Lucas frowned, leaning closer. "What's going on, Mom? Why are you saying this now?" "You were excited when I first told you about the job." Rachel hesitated again, and the tension between them thickened. There was something unspoken, something heavy hanging over their conversation. Lucas couldn't figure out what had shifted. I just don't want you to get hurt," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Some places have shadows, Lucas, things you don't notice until it's too late." "Shadows?" Lucas echoed, his frown deepening. "Mom, it's just a job, an opportunity. I'm not some kid walking into a trap. This is going to help us. Help you." Rachel's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked older than Lucas had ever seen her. "Just be careful, Lucas, promise me." Lucas softened, seeing the burden she was carrying, even if he didn't understand it. "I'll be careful, I promise. But you've got to trust me. I've worked too hard for this, and I'm not going to let anything ruin it." She nodded, but the worry in her eyes lingered. "I trust you, Lucas. I always have." Lucas glanced at his watch and stood up. "I've got to go. I'll call you later, okay?" Rachel forced a smile, though it seemed to drain her. "Good luck, baby." He kissed her on the forehead, grabbed his briefcase, and made his way to the door. Just before stepping out, he glanced back. She was still sitting at the table, staring into her tea, her face tight with worry. A flicker of doubt crept into Lucas's chest, but he shook it off. This was his time, and nothing was going to stand in his way. The subway ride to Midtown felt like the start of something monumental. Lucas stood in the packed car, gripping the pole, his thoughts racing. This was everything he had worked for, the first real step toward a successful career. He wasn't going to let his mum's odd warning throw him off. Robinson Associates was a big deal, one of the top firms in the industry. They didn't just hire anyone, and Lucas had outshone hundreds of other candidates to land this position. If his mum was worried, it was probably just nerves. This was a huge shift for both of them, and maybe she was just scared of what it meant for their future. He'd talk to her later, once things settled down. Stepping out of the subway station, Lucas paused at the base of the Robinson Associates building. The sleek glass tower loomed above him, gleaming in the sunlight. The way the building shimmered made it look like something out of a dream. Lucas took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and stepped forward, ready to seize his moment. Lucas stood at the entrance, taking a deep breath. "This is it," he thought. "This is where it all begins." Inside, the lobby was impressive, buzzing quietly with professionals rushing to their destinations. He approached the receptionist to check in, and within a few minutes, his supervisor, Ms. Taylor, arrived to take him upstairs. She was all business, sharp-eyed and quick on her feet. "Welcome aboard, Lucas," she said as they stepped into the elevator. "We have high expectations for you." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm ready to get started," Lucas replied, feeling his nerves shift into excitement. Ms. Taylor gave a curt nod. "Good. Let's see if you live up to your potential." As they walked through the office, Lucas took in his surroundings. Cubicles and glass-walled meeting rooms stretched out like a maze. Everything was sleek, high-tech, with people buried in their work, barely looking up as he passed by. He could feel the intensity of the place, the unspoken pressure to perform. Then he saw him, William Robinson, the CEO himself, deep in conversation with a group of senior executives. Lucas couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration. Robinson was a legend, the man who had built the company from nothing, everything Lucas aspired to be. But as they walked by, something unexpected happened. William's gaze flicked toward Lucas, and for just a moment, their eyes met. Lucas froze. Robinson's face remained neutral, professional, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, almost like a shadow crossing his features. And then it was gone. William turned back to his conversation, not giving Lucas a second glance. Shaking off the weird feeling, Lucas followed Ms. Taylor to his desk. It was probably nothing, he told himself. I'm just another new hire. But still, the moment stuck with him, like an itch in the back of his mind. As the day went on, Lucas buried himself in work. Ms. Taylor had given him a stack of documents to review, and, though it was straightforward enough, the weight of his new environment pressed on him. Robinson Associates was serious business, and everyone around him seemed hyper-focused. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to concentrate, his thoughts kept drifting back to that brief moment in the hallway. William Robinson, eyes locking with his, that flicker of something Lucas couldn't explain. Lucas frowned as he flipped through the report in front of him. It doesn't make sense, he thought. Why would the CEO notice me? He was just one of many new employees in a company with hundreds, maybe thousands of people. He tried to brush it off as first-day nerves. He'd always been prone to overthinking when something big was on the line. By lunchtime, he was still at his desk, eating quickly so he wouldn't fall behind. He had heard that Robinson Associates was cutthroat, a place where people were judged by how productive they were. Lucas wasn't about to slack off. The reports were dense, but he powered through, determined to make a solid first impression. Still, as the afternoon stretched on, that unsettling feeling wouldn't go away. It wasn't just about the way William Robinson had looked at him. There was something else, something beneath the surface that Lucas couldn't quite grasp. The thought lingered, like a shadow creeping at the edge of his consciousness. Later, as Ms. Taylor stopped by to check his progress, that strange unease came rushing back. Something felt off, but Lucas couldn't put his finger on it. It's just the first day, he told himself again, trying to shake the feeling. I'll get used to it. But deep down, he couldn't help but wonder, what if his mum had been right all along? She'd always warned him about places with shadows, about things that weren't visible until it was too late. As much as he tried to dismiss the thought, it clung to him. He wasn't in danger. He was here to succeed. Whatever shadows his mom had worried about, they couldn't touch him here. Could they? You're doing a great job, Lucas, Ms. Taylor said, glancing at his screen. You're keeping up well. Thanks, Lucas replied, leaning back to stretch a bit. Just trying to stay on top of everything. You're handling it just fine. Keep it up. She started to walk away, but then stopped, turning back, with a more serious look on her face. Oh, I almost forgot. Mr. Robinson wants to see you in his office. Now. Lucas blinked. Mr. Robinson? Yes. She didn't offer any more details. He's on the 40th floor. You should head up now. And with that, Ms. Taylor walked away, leaving Lucas at his desk, stunned. Why would William Robinson want to see me? He thought. It was only his first day. His heart pounded as he stood up and straightened his jacket. This couldn't be normal, right? New hires didn't just get called up to see the CEO out of the blue. Lucas glanced around at his co-workers, but no one seemed to notice anything unusual. Everyone was just focused on their own work. He made his way to the elevator, wiping his sweaty palms on his pants. Maybe it's good news, he told himself. Maybe William saw something impressive in my resume, or maybe he just wants to welcome me to the company. But despite his efforts to calm down, that little voice in the back of his mind whispered something else. Something unsettling. His mom's warning echoed again. Some places have shadows. When the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, it felt like a whole different world. The executive level was quieter, more refined. Floor-to-ceiling windows let the afternoon light flood in, highlighting the sleek furniture and plush carpet. Everything about this place screamed importance. Lucas approached the receptionist's desk, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. "I'm here to see Mr. Robinson, Lucas Grant." The receptionist, who sat with perfect posture and a warm, professional smile, nodded and gestured toward the large wooden doors behind her. "He's expecting you. You can go right in." Lucas hesitated for just a moment, his nerves taking over, but with a deep breath, he pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. William Robinson, office. The room was enormous, with a panoramic view of the city skyline that made him feel even smaller. Behind a huge mahogany desk sat William, his back to the window, skimming over some papers. For a few seconds, William didn't look up, and Lucas found himself frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Finally, the CEO lifted his head, his expression unreadable. "Lucas, come in. Have a seat." Lucas crossed the room and sat in a large leather chair across from William's desk, his heart still racing. The CEO's presence was even more intimidating in person, especially in the quiet of his office. "So," William began, his voice calm but deliberate. "How's your first day going?" Lucas swallowed and tried to keep his voice steady. "Good, sir. I've been working through the reports Miss Taylor gave me. Everything's going well so far." William nodded and set the papers aside. His gaze sharpened, as if he was studying Lucas more closely now. "That's good to hear." Silence hung in the air for a moment. William leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Lucas. There was something in the way he was looking at him, like he was trying to figure something out or place him. Lucas felt the tension building in the room. "Is there something specific you wanted to talk to me about, Mr. Robinson?" Lucas asked, feeling the pressure mount. William's expression stayed neutral. "You're new here, Lucas, just starting out. But your name, it caught my attention." Lucas felt his chest tighten. "My name?" he thought. William's eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward. "Grant, right?" Lucas nodded slowly, unsure of what was happening. "Yes, sir. Lucas Grant." William's gaze stayed on him for another moment before he leaned back, his expression unreadable. "It's a strong name. Reminds me of someone I knew once." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. There was something heavy in William's words, as if he had figured something out about Lucas. But William didn't push further. Instead, he smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I like to keep track of the new talent we bring in. We expect a lot from you, Lucas. Keep up the good work." Lucas forced a nod, not sure what else to say. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." William glanced down at the papers on his desk, a clear signal that the conversation was over. "Good. You can get back to it then." Lucas stood, his legs feeling unsteady as he walked toward the door. Just as he reached for the handle, William's voice stopped him. "Oh, and Lucas?" Lucas turned, his hand still on the door. "If you ever need anything," William said, his tone calm, but with an undertone Lucas couldn't quite place. "My door is always open." Lucas swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll keep that in mind." With that, he stepped out of the office, his heart still racing. The door quietly clicked shut behind him, leaving him alone in the hallway. He stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Why had William Robinson taken an interest in him on his very first day? And the way William had said his name. It felt like more than just a coincidence. The elevator ride back down seemed to stretch on forever. When Lucas finally returned to his desk, the office noise filled the air, but it did little to calm the growing unease in his gut. His mum had warned him about places like this, and now he couldn't shake the feeling that she might have been right. Something wasn't adding up. Later that evening, Lucas slid his key into the lock and opened the door to his apartment. The familiar smell of home hit him right away. Rachel's cooking and the lavender scent she used when cleaning. It was almost enough to shake off the tension that had clung to him since he left work. Almost. He set his briefcase down by the door and loosened his tie as he walked into the living room. Rachel was there, sitting on the couch with a book open in her lap, though she wasn't really reading. She looked up when he walked in, her expression hard to read. "How was it?" she asked, her tone calm but with something underneath, something Lucas couldn't quite figure out. Lucas hesitated. How could he sum up his day? The excitement of starting a new job, the strange feeling of being watched. William Robinson, eyes, that brief moment of recognition. It had all been a blur, excitement and unease mixed together. So, Feinti, la casadindandin, Tainti, Han trying to sound convincing as he sat down next to her. Busy. They've got me working on a bunch of reports. I'm still trying to get a feel for the place. Rachel nodded, but her eyes stayed on him a little too long. She wasn't buying it. "Anything unusual happen?" she asked. Lucas paused, unsure how much to share. "Not really," he started, then stopped. There was no point in hiding it. His mum had already been worried about this job. "Actually, I met William Robinson today." Rachel's grip on her book tightened. "You met him?" "Yeah," Lucas nodded. "He called me up to his office. I don't know why. It was weird. I mean, he's the CEO. Why would he care about a new hire?" Rachel didn't say anything, but Lucas noticed the way her shoulders tensed. She wasn't reacting the way he expected. There was something else going on. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Mum, what is it?" "Why are you acting like this?" Rachel's voice wavered as she set her book down on the coffee table. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "Lucas, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." Lucas frowned, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean?" Rachel closed her eyes for a second, taking a deep breath before she spoke. "William Robinson, he's not just your boss." Lucas's pulse raced, a cold sense of confusion hitting him. "What? What are you talking about?" Rachel looked him in the eye, her face full of regret and pain. "He's your father, Lucas." For a moment the words didn't register. Lucas blinked, his mind scrambling to process what she had just said. His father? William Robinson? The William Robinson? "What?" Lucas whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "That can't be true." Rachel nodded, her voice shaky but resolute. "It's true. William and I. We were together a long time ago before you were born." Lucas felt his world tilt. He stood up, running a hand through his hair. "But you said my dad left. You never told me who he was. How could you keep this from me? How could you not tell me?" Rachel stood too, wringing her hands. "I was trying to protect you, Lucas. I didn't want you to grow up knowing what kind of man he is." "What kind of man?" Lucas's voice rose, anger and shock bubbling to the surface. "You didn't think I had the right to know. To know who my father is." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes, but she held his gaze. "I didn't want you to be hurt, William. He didn't want you. When I told him I was pregnant, he fired me. He cut me off completely. And when I tried to find another job, he blacklisted me from the whole industry." Lucas froze, her words hitting him like a punch. He blacklisted you? Rachel nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes. I couldn't get work anywhere after that. No income, no help. It was just me and you, and I had to fight every day to make ends meet. He didn't care, Lucas. He just wanted me out of his life, and he made sure I couldn't come back. Lucas's stomach churned. The man he'd admired, the man he had just seen today at the office, his father, had done this. He had left his mother with nothing and abandoned him before he was even born. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Lucas asked, his voice softer now but still full of hurt. "All these years I've asked you about him, and you never told me anything. Why now?" Rachel sank back down onto the couch, her hands shaking as she tried to collect herself. "I thought I could keep it buried. I didn't want you to ever know what kind of man he really is. But when you told me you got the job at Robinson Associates, I couldn't hide it anymore. You deserve the truth, Lucas. I didn't know how to tell you." Lucas stood there, staring at her, his chest tight with a flood of emotions. Anger, confusion, sadness. All these years he had been kept in the dark, and now everything was unraveling in front of him. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. William Robinson, his father, had known about him all this time, and not only had he abandoned them, but he had also worked to destroy his mother's career. "I can't believe this," Lucas muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've been working for him, sitting in his office like I'm just another employee, and all this time he knew. He doesn't know who you are," Rachel said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't recognize you, Lucas. He doesn't know." "That's not the point." Lucas's voice cracked, the frustration and anger welling up inside him. "He abandoned us, Mom. He wrecked your life. And now I'm just supposed to sit there and work for him like nothing happened." Rachel looked up, her eyes pleading with him. "I didn't tell you this to make you hate him. I told you because I didn't want you walking into that place blind, without knowing the truth. I didn't want you getting close to him, only for you to be hurt all over again." Lucas's chest rose and fell as he tried to catch his breath, his mind racing. His whole life, he had pictured his father as a mystery, a man who just disappeared. But the truth was far worse. He paced the room, running his hands over his face, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't even know what to do now. Do I confront him? Do I quit?" Rachel stood and gently placed a hand on his arm. "That's up to you, Lucas. But think carefully. William is powerful. He could ruin you, just like he ruined me." Lucas met her gaze, his anger still simmering. "I'm not scared of him, Mom. He can't hurt me the way he hurt you." Rachel sighed, worry etched across her face. "I just want you to be safe." Lucas stared at her, the weight of everything crashing down on him. He didn't know what his next move was, but one thing was for sure. He couldn't keep working for William Robinson, as if nothing had happened. He couldn't pretend that the man who had abandoned him and shattered his mother's life was just another CEO. "I'll figure it out," Lucas said finally, his voice tight. "But I can't keep working there, not after this." Rachel nodded, her expression softening. "Whatever you decide, Lucas, I'm with you." Lucas took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. In a matter of minutes, everything had changed. The job he once thought was his big break now felt like a trap. And the man he had admired, his own father, was a stranger, a man who had caused more pain than Lucas ever imagined. He sat down beside his mother again, the weight of the truth sinking into his bones. The life he had known was over, and now he had to figure out what to do with the pieces left behind. 2 days later, Lucas stood on the subway, staring out the window as the train sped through the dark tunnels. His reflection flickered on the glass, but his mind was elsewhere. His mum's words still echoed in his head, and he couldn't stop thinking about what she had told him. William Robinson is my father. Lucas's fists clenched as the reality of it all hit him harder. Everything he thought he knew had been turned upside down, and now he had no idea what his next step would be. Every time Lucas replayed that conversation in his head, it only made his anger flare up more. His father, the same man he'd met on his first day at Robinson Associates, had looked at him like just another employee. This was the man who had destroyed his mother's career, blacklisted her, and walked away without even looking back. And now Lucas was working under him, pretending like none of it ever happened. The subway screeched to a stop, jolting Lucas out of his thoughts. He had to pull it together before stepping into the office. He couldn't let anyone see how close he was to losing it. Not yet. Not until he figured out his next move. The office was bustling as usual when Lucas walked in. Phones ringing, people chatting, and the steady clacking of keyboards filling the air. Nobody paid him much attention as he made his way to his desk, which suited him just fine. He needed time to think. He opened his laptop, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen, but his mind was elsewhere. Every task felt pointless now that he knew the truth. How can I sit here and act like everything's normal? He thought. How can I work for the man who abandoned me and my mum without a second thought? The worst part was that William didn't even remember him. Lucas had seen it in his eyes that first day, the brief flicker of recognition quickly brushed off. To William, Lucas was just another face in the crowd, and that made Lucas's blood boil even more. His eyes drifted across the office to where William's assistant sat outside his corner office. The door was closed, like it usually was, but Lucas could picture him in there, calm, composed, managing the company like the past never happened. Not for much longer, Lucas thought darkly. He couldn't just let this slide. He couldn't sit here, knowing the truth, and do nothing. But what was his next step? March into William's office and spill everything? Confront him in front of the whole company? He had thought about it, imagined it countless times. William's shocked face as Lucas unloaded the truth. But then what? William had power, influence. He could easily twist the situation against Lucas, just like he had with his mother. Lucas's eyes were glued to the screen, but the words in the report blurred together. I need to be smart about this, he reminded himself. He couldn't afford to act recklessly. As the morning dragged on, Lucas tried to push through the tightness in his shoulders, but every time he glanced up, the sight of William's office made his skin crawl. Lunchtime came and went, but Lucas barely touched his food. His mind was too cluttered, racing with thoughts of what to do next. He couldn't keep working here, not for William, but quitting without confronting him wasn't an option either. Lucas needed answers. He needed William to acknowledge what he had done. But how? After lunch, Lucas returned to his desk, feeling no closer to a solution. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his mum. How are you holding up? Lucas sighed, typing back a quick reply. Still figuring it out. He didn't have the heart to tell her how much worse he felt today than yesterday. His mum, Rachel, had been so worried that morning. Her eyes filled with the same fear she had tried to hide for years. She didn't want him getting sucked into William's world. She didn't want him hurt like she had been. But Lucas couldn't just let it go. Not now. Lucas knew he couldn't just walk away and act like nothing had happened. He needed answers. He needed to know why William had done it, why he'd fired Rachel, blacklisted her, and left them with nothing. His work became robotic, every task just a way to distract himself from the anger bubbling inside. He kept his head down, but his mind was racing. By the end of the day, he had made up his mind. He had to confront William face to face, but not here in the office, where William had all the power, where everyone could see. Lucas stood up from his desk, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed a plan, something that would catch William off guard, somewhere outside the office where Lucas could speak freely. As he packed up his things, an idea started to form. He had overheard some senior staff mention William's dinner plans earlier. Apparently, William and his family regularly dined at a fancy restaurant near the office, a place where they could be seen, where William could show off his success. Lucas clenched his jaw. That's it, he thought. That would be his chance. He'd show up at the restaurant unannounced and confront William right there, in front of the people who mattered most to him. He'd make William face the truth, make him acknowledge what he'd done to Rachel, to him. And he'd do it in a place where William couldn't hide behind his office door. He couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't let William keep living his lie. He didn't know how William would react, or if the whole thing would blow up in his face. But at this point, he didn't care. He had to do it. When Lucas arrived at the restaurant, it was exactly how he'd imagined it. Upscale, sleek, with big glass windows and soft lighting. The kind of place where people went to be seen. As he stood outside, scanning the crowd inside, he spotted William almost instantly. William Robinson sat at a corner table, his back to the window. Beside him was his wife, Hilary, her hair perfectly styled and gleaming under the chandelier lights. Across from them was their son, Sean, looking every bit the polished young man destined for success. They were laughing, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Lucas swallowed hard, wiping his damp palms on his pants. He had planned for this moment, but now that it was here, doubt gnawed at him. Each step toward their table felt heavier, as if the weight of his decision was pulling him down. At first, William didn't notice him. He was too wrapped up in some story he was telling his wife, gesturing with his hands as he talked. But as Lucas got closer, William's eyes lifted, and in an instant their gazes met. William frozen. Lucas's pulse quickened. William's smile vanished as his eyes locked with Lucas's, his face tightening. For a split second, everything went still, the tension in the air so thick it was hard to breathe. This was it, the moment when everything would unravel. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations, the clink of silverware and the soft chime of glasses being raised in toasts. It was the kind of place where everything was perfectly polished, a place for the wealthy to be seen but never heard too loudly. Lucas stood near the entrance, heart racing, staring at the man who once seemed so far away, now within arm's reach. "Lucas," William said, his voice low, his eyes flicking to his wife and son before settling back on Lucas. "What are you doing here?" Lucas felt his pulse race. William's tone wasn't welcoming. It was cautious, controlled. Hilary and Sean were staring at him now, confusion written all over their faces. "I'm here for the same reason you are, William," Lucas said, trying to keep his voice steady, though the tension was clear. "Dinner." Hilary raised an eyebrow, turning to William. "Is this someone from the office?" William cleared his throat, his face tight. "Yes, Lucas is a new employee." "A new employee?" Hilary echoed, her eyes darting between the two men, sensing something was off. Sean, sitting across the table, leaned forward, sizing Lucas up. "Doesn't seem like a work meeting, Dad," Sean said. He could sense William's silent plea for him to walk away, to let it go. But he had come too far for that. "I'm not here about work," Lucas said, his voice firmer now, his eyes locked on William. "I'm here for something else, something from a long time ago." William's face darkened, his posture stiffening. For the first time, Lucas saw a flash of something in his eyes. Fear, maybe. Hilary, sensing the shift, leaned closer to William, her expression confused. "William?" she asked softly. What is he talking about? William didn't answer right away. He reached for his glass, his hand steady but his grip tighter than it needed to be. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving Lucas. "This isn't the time or place for this," William said quietly. Lucas wasn't backing down. His gaze shifted to Hilary and Sean, then back to William. "You know who I am, don't you?" William's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with something Lucas couldn't quite identify. Panic, maybe, or anger at being trapped like this. "Lucas," William said in a controlled voice, "we can talk about this later." "No," Lucas said, his voice rising. "We're going to talk about it now, right here, in front of them." Sean frowned, glancing at his father. "Dad, what's he talking about?" Hilary's hand moved to William's arm, concern etched into her face. "William, what's going on? Why does he look so upset?" William's face was hard, his gaze locked on Lucas, but his tense posture betrayed him. The cracks were starting to show. He didn't want this conversation to happen here. He didn't want the truth coming out, but that only made Lucas more determined. Taking a steadying breath, Lucas spoke up. "I'm not just another new employee at your company. I'm the son you abandoned." Hilary's eyes went wide, her hand frozen mid-motion. "What?" Sean's face shifted from confusion to shock, his mouth hanging open as he glanced between Lucas and his father. William stayed silent, his face pale, jaw clenched. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. Lucas stepped closer to the table, his voice trembling with controlled anger. 24 years ago, you fired my mum. You left her with nothing and just walked away. And now I'm here, working for you, while you sit there like none of it ever happened." Hilary's hand flew to her mouth, her expression full of disbelief. "William, is this true?" Sean's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he turned to his father. "Dad, what's he talking about?" William still said nothing. His silence was the only answer anyone needed. Hilary's eyes filled with tears, her voice shaking as she looked at William. "You have another child. You did this to someone, and you never told me." The knot in Lucas's chest loosened just a little as the truth started to crack open the perfect life William had built. He looked at William, the rage in him slowly shifting into something else, something close to pity. "You ruined her life," Lucas continued, his voice softer but steady. "You left us with nothing, and you think you can keep living like it never happened." William's face was drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, Lucas saw him not as the powerful CEO everyone feared, but as a man trapped in his own lies. Hilary's voice cut through the tension, barely a whisper. "William, how could you?" William finally spoke, but his voice was weak, shaky. I made a mistake. I didn't think—" "You didn't think it would come back to you?" Lucas interrupted. "Well, it did." Sean's face twisted with anger as he glared at his father. "Dad, you seriously did this? You have a son you never told us about?" William's hand trembled as he set his glass down on the table, his eyes darting between his family and Lucas. He was stuck, caught in a moment he couldn't control. For a moment, nobody said a word. The low hum of the restaurant faded away, leaving only the weight of the truth hanging in the air. Hilary cried silently, staring at the man she thought she knew. Sean's fists were clenched on the table, knuckles white with fury. William's eyes met Lucas's once again, and this time there was no denial left. Just the burden of a past he could no longer escape. The restaurant felt colder now, the soft light from the chandeliers casting long shadows over the table. Conversations buzzed around them, oblivious to the storm unfolding at William Robinson's table. But for William and his family, time had stopped. Hilary wiped her tears, her hand shaking as she placed it on the table. "You've been lying to me, to us, all these years?" Sean leaned in, his voice hard with anger. "You have another son? You wrecked someone's life and thought we'd never find out?" Lucas stood at the edge of the table, his chest rising and falling with a swirl of emotions, rage, pain, and a little satisfaction. The truth was out now, and William couldn't hide behind his money or power anymore. There was no more pretending. William's eyes flickered to Lucas, then back to his wife and son. I didn't want to hurt you," he began, his voice raspy. I thought it was over. It was a mistake, a long time ago." "A mistake?" Lucas's voice was sharp, cutting through the air. "You didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed my mum's life. You blacklisted her." Hilary gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. "You blacklisted her?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "William, how could you do something like that?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked trapped, like all the things he'd been trying to hide were finally out in the open, and there was nowhere left to run. "I had no choice," William finally muttered, his voice low and almost desperate. "I had a family, a career. I had to protect everything I'd built." Sean shot up from his chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "So you saved yourself and left them to suffer?" His voice dripped with disgust. "You didn't care about them. All you cared about was your image." Tears streamed silently down Hilary's face as she shook her head. "I trusted you, William. I built a life with you. How could you lie to me like this? How could you do this to your own child?" William's face twisted with guilt as he finally looked up at Hilary. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said, his voice shaky. "I thought if I buried it, it would go away. I thought I was protecting you." Hilary let out a bitter laugh, her voice cracking. "Protecting me? From the truth? You didn't protect anyone, William. You just protected yourself." Sean's face was cold, his voice sharp with anger. "You lied to us, Dad. How many more people have you hurt?" William shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "There's no one else. I swear." Hilary's voice broke again, her eyes swollen from crying. "Do you really expect us to believe you? After everything? You've been lying to me for more than 20 years, William. I don't even know who you are anymore." Lucas's heart twisted at the sight of Hilary's pain. She had been caught in the middle, completely unaware of the life William had left behind. But Lucas couldn't feel sorry for her. Not yet. She was as much a victim of William's lies as Lucas and his mom had been. William's fear had cost them everything. "You don't get to be scared," Lucas said, his voice shaking with anger. "You didn't lose everything. We did." William glanced up at Lucas, his eyes clouded with something that almost looked like regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but the words felt empty, weak. "I'm so sorry." Lucas wasn't having it, not after everything. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," he replied, his tone cold. "You don't just get to say sorry and walk away." William opened his mouth to respond, but Hilary cut him off, her voice trembling with fury. "Lucas is right. You don't get to make this right with an apology, William. You lied to us. You ruined their lives." She turned toward Lucas, her expression softening as tears welled up in her eyes again. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. I had no idea. I didn't know." Lucas looked at her, his anger still simmering just beneath the surface, but he gave a small nod. "I know. This isn't your fault." Sean, who had been quiet for a moment, finally spoke, disbelief thick in his voice. So what now? What are we supposed to do with all this, Dad? Just pretend like it didn't happen? William didn't answer. He stared down at the table, his hands trembling, his face pale. The man who once seemed so powerful, so untouchable, now looked like a shell of the person he pretended to be. "We can't pretend anymore," Hilary said quietly, her voice full of pain. "We have to face this." Lucas's chest tightened as he watched William, this man who had caused so much harm, sitting there in silence, unable to explain himself. The truth had come out, and now the family William had built on lies was falling apart. "I've said what I needed to say," Lucas said, his voice steady but cold. "It's up to you now to figure out how to deal with it." Hilary's tears flowed freely, and even Sean, who had been so angry moments ago, seemed lost. The weight of William's betrayal had shattered them, and there was no going back. William finally looked up, his voice barely audible. I'll fix this. I'll make it right." But Lucas just shook his head. "You can't fix this, William. You can't undo what you've done." With that, Lucas turned away from the table and left, leaving them to face the truth. As he walked out of the restaurant, the weight on his chest lightened just a little. The confrontation was over. The truth was out, but the damage was done, and there was no going back. The buzz around the Robinson Associates office felt different today. Conversations that were usually light and professional now had a sharp edge of gossip. Eyes darted toward William Robinson office, the glass walls somehow seeming more transparent, as if everyone in the building could see the cracks forming around the man who had built an empire. Lucas sat at his desk, watching people move about. Word had spread faster than he'd expected, and now the whispers had turned into full-on discussions. Everyone knew. William Robinson, the CEO who seemed invincible, wasn't untouchable anymore. He stared at the report in front of him, but the words blurred together. He should have felt some satisfaction, knowing the man who had destroyed his mother's life was finally paying the price. But instead, a quiet emptiness settled inside him. The anger that had fueled his confrontation was no longer burning so hot. Now all that was left was the aftermath. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. A text from his mom. "How are you?" Lucas sighed, typing a quick reply. "It's all over the office now. Everyone knows." Her response came almost immediately. "Are you okay?" He hesitated before replying. "I think so. Just trying to figure out what comes next." Lucas leaned back in his chair, glancing toward the far end of the office where William's door remained shut. No one had seen him come in today, and rumors were already flying. Some said he was hiding at home, avoiding the spotlight. Others speculated he was holed up with his lawyers, trying to shield himself from the storm that was closing in. It was too late now. The truth was out, and there was no going back. By noon, Lucas's phone buzzed, but this time it wasn't his mom. It was an email sent to the whole company. The subject line simply read, "Company Announcement." His heart pounded as he opened it. "Dear Team, effective immediately, William Robinson has resigned from his position as CEO of Robinson Associates. The board of directors has appointed an interim CEO to guide the company through this transition. We remain committed to our core values and will continue to uphold the integrity and reputation of the organization. Thank you for your dedication during this time." Lucas's grip tightened around his phone. It was official. William was out. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the email, letting it all sink in. The man who had held so much power, who had ruined lives without hesitation, was finally knocked down from his pedestal. But this wasn't the moment Lucas had imagined. He had replayed this scenario countless times in his head: William's downfall, his public disgrace. But now that it was real, it didn't feel the way he thought it would. There was no sense of triumph, no closure. It just felt empty. His phone buzzed again, pulling him back to reality. Another text from his mom. "I just saw the news. How are you feeling about this?" He stared at the message for a while before responding. "Yeah, he's gone, but it doesn't feel like I thought it would." Her reply came slower this time, more thoughtful. "It won't feel the way you expected, Lucas, but you did what you had to. You faced him. That's what counts." Lucas closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. She was right. He had done what he needed to do. The truth was out, and William was gone. But the weight of everything that had happened still hung heavy on him. Later that afternoon, the quiet whispers in the office had turned into open conversations. Lucas kept his head down, ignoring the curious stares from his co-workers. He didn't want to be part of the office gossip. He just wanted to get through the day. But as the hours passed, he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. At some point, he'd have to face the reality of it all, not just what happened to William, but what it meant for him. He had spent so long gearing up for that moment, imagining how it would feel to finally hold William accountable. But now that it was over, all he had left were the consequences. He was still working at the company William had built, a company that had, in many ways, been built on lies. A knock on his desk pulled him from his thoughts. Lucas looked up to see his supervisor, Ms. Taylor, standing there, her face unreadable. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked, her voice calm but serious. Lucas nodded, following her to a small conference room in the back of the office. The room had glass walls that gave a clear view of the bustling work floor outside. Ms. Taylor closed the door behind them and leaned against the table, folding her arms across her chest. "So," she began, her tone even and measured, "I'm sure you've seen the news." Lucas nodded, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "Yeah, I've seen it." Ms. Taylor studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I know about your connection to William." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen that coming. "You do?" She nodded slowly. "Word gets around. I don't know all the details, but people are talking." Lucas felt his chest tighten. The fear of being exposed started creeping in. "What exactly are they saying?" Ms. Taylor sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "Mainly that you're his son, and that the scene at the restaurant wasn't as private as you might have thought." Lucas's stomach dropped. He hadn't even considered that. The restaurant had been crowded, full of people who probably found his confrontation with William as juicy as the food on their plates. Of course, word would spread. "I didn't mean for this to blow up," Lucas said quietly. I needed to confront him for what he did." Miss Taylor nodded, her expression softening. "I get it. I really do. And I'm not blaming you. But you need to be careful, Lucas. This company is in a tough spot right now. With Williams stepping down, everything's going to be under a microscope." She paused, giving him a serious look. "Just be mindful of how you move forward from here. People are going to be watching you." Lucas swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I mean, you need to decide what you want to do," she said quietly. "Staying here, Working at the company your father built, it's not going to be easy. People will ask questions and they'll expect answers." Lucas stared at her, his thoughts racing. He hadn't even considered that. All his energy had been focused on confronting William, on making him own up to his mistakes. But now, what came next? Working at Robinson Associates, living under the shadow of his father's legacy. It was bigger than just a job now. "You don't have to make a decision right away," Ms. Taylor added, her tone softer. "But think about it. This place is changing, and you need to decide if you want to be part of that change." Lucas nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. "Thanks. I'll think about it." Ms. Taylor gave him a small nod and left the room, leaving Lucas alone with his swirling thoughts. By the time he walked out of the office that evening, the sun had already set, casting long shadows across the city streets. He moved slowly, his mind heavy with everything that had happened. William was gone. He had been forced out after Lucas exposed the truth. But now Lucas was left with a choice. Should he stay at Robinson Associates, knowing the truth about how the company had risen to success? Or was it time to move on and forge his own path, away from his father's shadow? He didn't have an answer yet. All he knew was that the truth had shifted everything, and now he had to figure out where he stood in the aftermath. As he reached his apartment, Lucas's phone buzzed. Another text from his mom. "Come home, we'll figure this out together." A faint smile tugged at his lips, the heavy weight on his chest easing just a little. He had faced the past, and now it was time to think about what kind of future he wanted to build. Sitting at the kitchen table in his mom's apartment, Lucas felt a sense of calm wash over him. The comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of the radio in the background. It was peaceful, but the weight of the last few days still lingered, heavy and unresolved. Rachel stood at the stove, her back turned to him as she stirred a pot of oatmeal. She hadn't said much since Lucas had walked through the door the night before, and he knew she was waiting. Waiting for him to tell her what happened, waiting to hear what he planned to do next. He didn't have all the answers yet. Rachel set the pot aside and turned to face him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You want to talk about it?" she asked gently. Lucas looked up at her, the weariness in his body too heavy to hide. He stepped down. "William's gone. The company's already announced it." Rachel's eyes softened as she sat down across from him. "I heard. It's all over the news. They're calling it a scandal." Lucas nodded, rubbing his hands together as he struggled to find the right words. "It doesn't feel like I thought it would, Mum. I thought I'd feel something. Relief, maybe. Satisfaction. But I don't." Rachel reached across the table, placing a comforting hand over his. "That's because it's not just about him," she said softly. "It's about everything we've been through. Nothing he does now can change that." Lucas looked down at her hand, noticing the lines of wear and strength etched into her skin, the years of struggle, resilience, and survival, everything they'd endured together. "I don't know what to do next," Lucas admitted quietly. "Staying at the company feels wrong, but leaving, I don't know if that's the answer either." Rachel nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to figure it all out right now, Lucas. You've already done the hardest part. You faced him. You made him admit what he did." Lucas swallowed hard, the memories of confronting William still fresh in his mind. "I keep thinking about all those years, all the times I asked about my father, and you couldn't tell me the truth. Now that I know, it feels like it wasn't worth it." Rachel's expression softened as she leaned forward, her voice gentle but steady. It was worth it, Lucas. You deserved to know the truth, and no matter how hard it was, you needed to hear it. Lucas let out a shaky breath, her words sinking in. For the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves to simply enjoy being together, without the heavy weight of the past hanging over them. Later that evening, as they sat on the couch watching an old sitcom rerun, Lucas turned to Rachel, finally asking the question that had been on his mind all day. Do you think we'll ever get real justice for what he did? Rachel kept her eyes on the TV, her expression thoughtful. In a way, we already have. Lucas frowned, confused. What do you mean? She turned to him, her voice calm but firm. Justice isn't always about punishment, Lucas. Sometimes it's about survival. William might have ruined my career, but he didn't ruin me. I raised you. We survived. And now we're stronger than we would have been if he had stayed in our lives. Lucas stared at her, letting the depth of her words sink in. She was right. They had survived. Despite everything William had done, despite the hardships he had caused, they had made it. A lump formed in Lucas's throat, emotions swirling inside him, too deep to express in words. He had spent so long fixating on the idea of bringing William down, of making him pay for what he had done. But sitting here with his mum, Lucas realized that the real victory wasn't in seeing William fall. It was in the fact that they had made it through despite everything. I guess you're right, Lucas said quietly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. We're still here. Rachel squeezed his hand, pride shining in her eyes. And we always will be. The next morning, Lucas found himself thinking about what came next. He could stay at Robinson Associates, but the more he thought about it, that was William's legacy, not his. He needed a clean slate to build something for himself, free from the shadows of his father's past. Rachel walked into the kitchen, still wrapped in her robe, and gave him a warm smile. Morning, she said softly. Morning, Lucas replied, handing her a cup of coffee. They sat together at the table, the quiet of the morning wrapping around them like a blanket. For a long time, neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. There was a calm between them now, a shared understanding that hadn't been there before. Finally, Lucas broke the silence. I think I'm going to leave Robinson Associates. Rachel looked at him, her expression gentle but supportive. You don't have to decide that right now. I know, Lucas said, taking a sip of his coffee, but I think it's the right choice. I can't keep working there, not with everything that's happened. I need to do something different, something that's mine. Rachel nodded, a proud smile spreading across her face. I think that's a smart move. Lucas smiled back, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Yeah, I think it is. They sat there a while longer, talking about the future, about all the possibilities ahead. For the first time in years, Lucas felt like he was in control of his own life. The past would always be part of him, but it didn't have the power to define him anymore. He had faced his father, uncovered the truth, and now he was free to build his own path, one based on his decisions, not on William Robinson mistakes. As the morning sun climbed higher, Lucas glanced at his mom, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything they had been through together. We made it, he said quietly, a small smile playing on his lips. Rachel smiled back, her eyes shining with love and pride. Yes, we did. It's incredible how one decision, one moment, can change the course of so many lives. Rachel's courage, William's cold indifference, and the shocking twist of their son unknowingly stepping into his father's world. It's a reminder of how the past always has a way of catching up. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think William should have handled things? What would you do if you were in Rachel's shoes? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that dig deep into real human struggles, the hard choices we face, and the consequences that follow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.